So I would like to start asking a question for the audience. It's very related to what I want to talk about today. It's about what has happened this year and at the end of the 2024. What do you think has been the major breakthrough that has happened by the end of 2024 and especially this year that has allowed us to have what we have now, such powerful LLMs and agents? Anyone? Come on, don't be shy. Okay, so I'm gonna be talking about that, and I would like this talk to be a little bit also thought-provoking, but also a little bit of a retrospective of what we've had, because this goes just so fast that sometimes we just forget how to think of what has happened that has brought us to where we are today. And in general, by analyzing the past, we can also try to see what is going to happen next year, and we can draw our kind of conclusions and maybe try to predict what's going to happen. So this presentation, I'm going to talk about three major things. First, we're going to talk about models, about LLMs, about reasoning, which has been great in the development of the power of the LLMs. Then about the products and agents, mainly what those LLMs are allowing us to have nowadays and how it's shaping all kinds of products everywhere. And at the end, I'm going to do like a closing remarks on the user behavior, and we'll see that there are very different users in this kind of landscape and how every different user has a different behavior. So by the end of 2024, we were already seeing some kind of models that, well, let's go before a little bit. I still remember the days in which we had those LLMs, and we were seeing people saying, if you tell the LLM to think before speaking, you're getting better results. And it was true. And it was such a simple thing to just say to the LLM, think step by step. There's actually a paper that is very famous called Step by Step. And by the end of 2024, OpenAI did something that is basically, let's do this the right way. Let's not rely on the LLM's ability to generalize so well that they can reason without us teaching them to reason, but let's actually do something new. Let's teach them in some way, and I will say now why I'm saying like this. Let's teach the LLMs to reason by default before they speak. And after that, it was just such a revolution. Like nowadays, just when we speak about LLMs, we already understand that they're reasoning. It's not a new thing, and it's, in general, it's given, right, that LLMs are thinking. All the big ones that we had this year, O3, GPT-5, all the Claude models, Gemini Pro, all of those have thinking by default. And even in some of them, like Gemini 2.5 Pro, you can't even disable the reasoning. And obviously, we also have the open source ones, which is basically the same. Nowadays, the open source most powerful models are thinking by default. But how does it work? Like, how do they think? Do they really think? People were saying, and they're kind of right, that LLMs are just, next word prediction, but in a very powerful way. And actually thinking, if you can make it linear, you can actually pose it as a next token prediction problem. But how can we teach LLMs to, reason? And how do they help reasoning to go to a better answer? Can't they just reason without this token process? How does it work in general? And why are they so much better? And they are really so much better. I like to show this to understand how powerful they are in comparison with non-thinking models. So by the end of 2024, in November more or less, we had GPT-4o, which cost more or less $4 per million tokens. And this is some kind of index that tells you how intelligent they are. It combines a weighted average, a reasoning capacity, instruction following, agent workflows like tool calling, coding, maths, etc., etc. And just in the difference of 6 months, we've gone from here to there. So we've more than doubled the capacity of the models, and it's so much incredibly cheaper. Like this one is $4 per million, and that is 3 cents per million. This is open source model released by OpenAI last August. This is just incredible progress, and just by 6 months. And this is all thanks to reasoning. Also, reasoning is not only making answers better, but it's unlocking what LLMs can do. So before this, nobody thought that a large language model or AI in general could earn or win the gold medal in some kind of Olympiad, like the International Olympiad of Mathematics. But then, Alexander Wei is a research scientist in OpenAI. He works specifically in reasoning, and he participated in 2015 in the Math Olympiad, and he was so surprised by the results of the reasoning models. So OpenAI was teaching LLMs how to reason, and those reasoning processes were allowing the LLMs to solve mathematical problems that were so complicated. For you to understand, to win a gold medal in the Olympiads in the International Olympiads of Mathematics, you have to be in the top 8, more or less. It's dynamic. It changes each year, and only the top 8% of people that score in that kind of exam, which are, I think there are 6 questions and divided in 2 days. So only the top 8% win the gold medal. And he was surprised by this because they weren't really teaching, for example, for computing, how to write code that would also win the gold medal in the informatics Olympiad. So it's incredible how they can generalize also reasoning across different domains. So how does it work? How do we really teach, or how is OpenAI teaching LLMs to reason? And that's even more interesting, because before that we had supervised fine-tuning where we would just tell the LLM what is the next word given a prompt and given the answer that I want the LLM to learn. But with reasoning, that paradigm has shifted in a way that it's making it even better, because we don't even need the data like we needed it before. We don't need such curated data. We just need the question, for example, a mathematical problem, and we just need the answer, the right answer. And how it's reasoning in the middle, it has to be figured out by the LLM itself. When it gets it right and that reasoning leads to the right answer, we reward the LLM, and that's how, in general, we are shifting from supervised fine-tuning to reinforcement learning. In the case of mathematics, for example, it's very simple, right? Like, you just have the question, you have the right answer. If the reasoning leads to the right answer, you reward the LLM in a mathematical function. But this can be interpolated somehow to coding. So it's basically the same. You have a test, right? You have inputs and desired outputs. If the LLM generates some code, when you run it, it leads to the tests passing, then that's pretty much the same, right? You can reward the LLM for doing a good job. And this is called reinforcement learning by task execution. And this has been the major paradigm shift that has allowed us to have what we have now. And what does this mean? If we think about agents, what are agents? Agents have existed for a long time already, but not as we know them today. Agents are basically something that can understand the environment, reason or apply some kind of rules to that, and then act accordingly. And this is a loop, because when it acts, it changes the environment and so on and so on. The thing is that with LLMs, we already had the observation part. The LLMs are very good at understanding everything, our world. They're perfect world models. We kind of, okay, they were reasoning very well if we prompt them to reason, but now with reasoning models, that's even better. Like, reasoning is already embedded into LLMs nowadays. And then we have the act part, and this is also super important. And what we achieved by teaching the LLMs to reason is the same thing we obtained and that allowed us to have LLMs that also do tool calling. And by teaching LLMs to do tool calling the same way with reinforcement learning, we have the ACT part. And this is the bread and butter of agents, and which has allowed us to have such powerful agents doing everything that do today. So what does this mean in general? So reasoning is here to stay. I don't think anybody doubts that. The only question that I have for 2026 is if this will be the paradigm that will stay, if the way we understand reasoning now will be the reasoning that we will have, because now it's all related to token prediction, right? But what if we can have some kind of mathematical space where LLMs can think rather than having tokens? Although tokens are useful because we understand them. We don't need any more like prompt engineering or whatever you want to call it, because the LLM, if you pose the problem in a clear way, it can already think how to solve the problem. We're not limited by amount of data, because now getting the data for reinforcement learning is much easier. The data is much cheaper. You just need a question and the answer, and you let the LLM iterate until it gets the right answer. You reward it. That's your data set. And then, as I was asking myself, and this is a very interesting question, like what will happen in 2026? Like, will this paradigm just be the new norm, or we will have something new, a new way of thinking, or maybe parallel thinking? There were already papers that were making the LLMs think in parallel and then gather the thoughts in some way to better increase the answers. Actually, this is something done when, for example, in the Olympiads, the LLMs were doing a lot of what it's called test time augmentation, which is basically you make the LLM think many, many times in the same problem and then gather all the thoughts in a single answer. Something new that we've had in this year has been more competition, which is always great. So far, in 2024, it was mainly OpenAI, OpenAI, OpenAI. I remember there were many people, myself included, mocking Google because they couldn't make it. It's like you have the technology to differentiate yourself, because everybody's using NVIDIA cards, yes, but Google has TPUs. That's something that is really separating Google from everyone else, but they couldn't make it. Why? Why couldn't they make it? But then in 2025, they released Gemini 2.5 Pro. And that was groundbreaking, because it suddenly became like the main LLM that everybody could use for their hardest problems. And not only that, but we had more contestants of the LLM providing services. We had also XAI Grok, and as I will talk now, we also have like cheaper models and open source models that are also allowing us to build our own services without sharing our data with third parties, which is also very important in specific domains. What does it mean when we have so many providers? Well, it's pretty obvious. We shouldn't be just focusing ourselves in a single provider. And this also applies for agents. We have Copilot, but there are new agents coming out. There's Jules, for example. There is Codex from OpenAI, and there will be new ones in 2026. So the best I can recommend, and we're at Site also trying our best to do that, it's not to be model agnostic and to build everything thinking that next month there will be a better model from another provider, and you just have to use it or you will stay behind. There's something interesting about open source models, and it is that they're all Chinese. Apart from OpenAI's open source model, which was a surprise for everyone. Well, they were kind of announcing it for a while, but nobody thought they would release them after all. But they did, and it's a very, very good model. Actually, if it wasn't because of Minimax, which is kind of new, it would be on the top of the charts. But this is interesting. It kind of shows how China, it's maybe approaching this differently. because we have in the US all the closed source models, which are top tier, but we're seeing China kind of betting more on the open source. And for a reason. I mean, you all know what happened with Llama, and that's also an interesting thing to think about. What is happening with Meta, and what will they do? Because it looks like they went out of the open source models, and it's not really clear what they will be doing to stay in the market, right? Obviously, they have Copilot, and it's a very powerful thing they're building with Agents HQ, for example. And it looks like they're going to partner with a lot of, with the big ones in the market of LLMs to back up their agents. But yeah, we don't really know what they're going to do about the LLM landscape. And something that kind of interests me in particular, but because I like economics a lot and stocks and everything, is how when DeepSeek launched their model, which was almost as good as the closed source ones, this happened. The valuation in the US stock market dropped by $1 trillion in value. That's just incredible. It's one of the worst days in the stock market in the US history. And it makes us wonder, like, how much is overvalued? Or is this some kind of AI bubble? And I guess we all are thinking, like, how similar is this to the dot-com bubble that we had in the 2000s, right? Because if such a thing like China releasing an open source model can do this, then what could happen tomorrow if there's something, again, like this? Although we have seen that NVIDIA is kind of still very well valued, and that's for a reason. I mean, the technology is there, and NVIDIA not only providing GPUs for LLMs, but they've always provided GPUs for gaming and for other kind of applications like digital imaging. So the technology is correct, but it's like wondering if it's kind of overvalued and how much of a bubble it is. Sorry. So how many of you here think that AI is a bubble currently? Well, I'm surprised. Yeah, good. Thank you. So a bubble, I would say a bubble is when the stock is overvalued in a way that it's bound to explode at some point. So, and by explosion, it means like a rapid devaluation of the value that has been hyped because, for example, there were expectations that couldn't be met. So, for example, in the dot-com bubble, what happened is that basically there were many people building domains that were pure smoke, right? And when certain market things happened, those people that were backing their domains with pure smoke, they didn't have any more money for those false promises. And then everything crashed. And the interest rates rose, so they couldn't borrow more money, and everything went downhill from there. So is it the same now? I don't know. I mean, I'm no expert. But, you know, it's kind of worrying that if you see the progress that we're having and that companies are having in terms of how much money they're spending in, for example, Stargate project. I'm pretty sure most of you know this. This year, this Stargate company was created, and they are going to invest and use, during 4 years, $500 billion. And that's just incredible amounts of money that they're going to spend building these new data centers for computer and for AI. It's obvious that this kind of growth can't be sustained for a long time, or can it? Where is it going to stop? We don't really know. But it's obviously that they're just betting incredibly so much in this technology. And this brings me to the question, what will happen in 2026? Will models get better just because we put more data or we have more resources to train them? Or will the benefits come more from quality of life changes, like, for example, agent memory? For example, I work so much with Copilot, and one thing that I would love to have in 2026 is some kind of Copilot that can remember what I did last week. Because I implemented something that created a specific function to do the work, and now I'm implementing something else this week that kind of needs that helper function, but it's just implementing it all over again. So I would like it to remember what it implemented in a way that it can just reuse it without me telling it explicitly. That would be great, and that doesn't really require, right, a better model, just to structure things in a different way. And also sub-agents. So for example, web scraping is very complicated. It has so many things, so many little pieces that are very complex on their own. You have unblocking, you have page discovery, like the structure of the website that you want to crawl. You have the data extraction part from the interesting pages that you want to extract data from. And then you have monitoring. So many small pieces that on their own, they're already very hard to implement. And then it's very hard for a single agent to do all of that. But what if you could have sub-agents do all of those separately and then have a main agent that gathers all the work into a single thing? That would be great. And actually in VS Code Insiders, which is the latest one that that Microsoft is working on, we already have sub-agents, MCP or tool to work and delegate those tasks in sub-agents. And then we don't pollute the context of the main agent, we just get the response from the sub-agent, and then we work on top of that. I think that's going to be a real game changer in 2026. What about China? We will get pretty sure some new stuff from China. I don't know if open source or closed source. I'm pretty sure like open source is very famous from China because it's more open. Like I don't think people in the Western world we would be using a closed source LLM from China. I mean they already have, but we just don't use it. We don't trust it so much. But we trust open source, right? Because we run it in our machines. So it's pretty likely that we will see more and more stuff from China that is open source, and it will be very, very useful. And yeah, of course, new regulations in Europe, because that's what Europe does, right? I'm pretty sad about Mistral AI, because they looked very powerful company and actually backed a lot by the French government. But obviously, it can't compete with US and China. I hope that I'm wrong and that they will do some good stuff and some interesting stuff in 2026, but it's not looking specifically good because of the EU regulations. And what does this mean in general? It means that we're reshaping a lot how the internet interacts with people, because it's not people who are accessing the sites anymore. It's the bots which are accessing the sites. Because, for example, this AI overview that Google implemented in late 2024, and pretty much everybody is using it, it just means that it's not humans who are accessing the websites. It's just robots. And then what does this mean, for example, for SEO? You're adding a complexity layer on top of SEO. It's not anymore only the positioning of your website, but how an LLM understands it and how it gathers the results into the response that will be probably the only thing that the human will read. And in general, that's not only the thing, but the overall tendency is that people will use less and less the web. Like for example, myself, I haven't gone to Stack Overflow, for example. I can't remember when was the last time I went to Stack Overflow because I just asked to ChatGPT or whatever, and just give me the right answer, and that's it. And there are a lot of products that are coming thanks to all of these new technologies. Some of them are too niche, like for example, I would say this one of Live Assistant. I can't really think of super useful use cases, but those are just bets from the companies, for example, Google. And then there are some that could be more interesting, like this OpenAI Atlas that they just talked about recently, which are looking much, much more interesting for kind of everybody, I think, could have like a good use case for that. So it may be just a matter of how we approach it. And obviously, we have coding agents. So there are so many coding agents being released. And for example, Microsoft is really betting on how Copilot is going to reshape how we develop. And they are setting up a whole ecosystem in GitHub to be able to use different agents backed by different LLMs and also agents from different providers. And the thing is, how do we actually orchestrate all of those agents? How do we manage them? Because it's very hard to manage people. It's even harder to manage agents and to gather all the work that they're doing and putting them into right context and everything. So I think that's a good point that could be 2026, and it could improve. Yeah, this is Agent HQ that they presented last week in their GitHub Universe event that they hosted in San Francisco. This is looking very interesting and very good in general, and it will probably reshape how we understand nowadays coding and collaboration in GitHub. So about the user behavior, there are clear differences. Companies, for example, they're delighted with how much spending and investment is happening, right? And we have Project Stargate, and we have things like this that in the first 6 months of 2025, just the investment in AI grew more the US economy than the user spending. So it's clearly something that companies want. And then we have some other people that don't really want their sites or their data to be scraped by AI. So there are other products, the blockers, right? And this is clearly a business model, a new business model for things like blockers like Cloudflare. And then, like we already saw in the previous talk, we have like some people that don't really like, myself included, like the internet, it's not what it used to be, and there are just so many cases of people complaining about how AI and AI-generated content is ruining the world. And yeah, this word that was born, AI slop, I'm pretty sure all of you have heard it, and it's basically a detrimental term to say that it's like cheap content generated by AI and that everybody hates. So for conclusions, I would like to highlight that we have seen incredible advancement of the power of capacities of LLMs thanks to reasoning. So reasoning is definitely here to stay. That's no doubt. But we should be model agnostic because there's more competition than ever in providers. And also we should try to be agent agnostic, which probably Agent HQ is gonna give to us. There's a huge growth that probably will stop at some point. When or how much, we don't really know. Something to be concerned about, maybe. And it's clear, there's a clear shift on how web data is being consumed. It's going from people to agents, to bots, and we also have to adapt to that. And in general, myself, that I work in the research team inside, I would say for practitioners that are using those for their products, that evaluation is more important than ever. So you have a use case, you should really when you shift from provider to provider, you should have a proper way to evaluate your use case and how good your models, the models you're trying are for your case. And yeah, sorry for making it too long. I really like to talk a lot, and yeah, thanks for listening, and this is all I wanted to talk about today. Thank you.